Alright, YouTube, when it was being reported a couple of days ago that Julian Assange and Wikileaks were planning more email and material releases regarding the US elections, I didn't report on it right away. I only mentioned it in passing because it wasn't clear whether it was coming from Assange and Wikileaks themselves. Now, though, it is confirmed, indeed, Julian Assange and Wikileaks are going to leak more materials that they've obtained. They had said in a speculative manner that this might happen after the Democratic convention. Nothing more is going to likely be leaked while the convention is going on. The first set of releases showing that things were rigged, that obviously some untrustworthy stuff was going on, was largely deposited the day before the DNC began so that it would start with more protests. It would damage Hillary. Now, this may not have been WikiLeaks' intent so much as making sure it got into the media, the news cycle. But that is the effect that it's had. Hillary Clinton's trustworthiness ratings have not been particularly high in some time. But this is shoving them even lower, honestly. This is worse for her than the investigation of the FBI, where James Comey stood on stage in front of the whole country, said, yeah, this is corrupt. By anyone's definition, they would have known that it was wrong. It was obviously illegal, but we're not going to put her on trial, which is, in a nutshell, what was actually said. I think sometimes the shills for Hill forget this fact. That was just the first batch of releases, though. They've got more materials now. Look at the wording of this, though. That's something you have to do. They say more materials pertaining to the U.S. election. That doesn't mean that all of these materials are just on the Democratic Party. There could be some dirt on the RNC as well. I wouldn't be the least bit surprised, for example, to find that somewhere around there's material floating around showing that certain top Republican donors, certain officials within the Republican Party have openly colluded behind closed doors with the DNC in order to try to buffer Hillary up to stop Trump, who they feel is endangering his own party in some way, which would probably hurt them more than it would hurt Trump, despite the worrying analysis you might get there. I have a feeling that Hillary herself is implicated in some materials as colluding with others, or at least people very, very close to her. I wouldn't be surprised to see that the two parties are more worried about third-party membership rising than most people would believe. You've seen, though, the proof is in the pudding. If you look at the way in which the media, and this is both the left and the right, it's both like the Fox News sort of people, Breitbart, and like Salon and Being Liberal and MSNBC, what have they begun to do for the first time in an election cycle? They begin to try to beat on the libertarian and green movements. There was a post yesterday by Salon to the effect of, oh, well, the Greens and Jill Stein, they're still doomed. The Democrats will reabsorb these people. Don't take the Green Party seriously. It's bad for you. Hillary will lose and evil orange Trump will become dictator of a new Fourth Reich. And then the sort of right-wing outlets were attacking the Libertarian Party. Oh, well, Weld has been anti-gun in the past, and Gary Johnson wants to open your borders, or he's too liberal or something like that in some way, some unknown way. So don't vote for them. They're still doomed. There will never be a third party in the United States. There may never be a third party, because what might end up happening is that the libertarian movement might displace one or both of the parties currently in existence. The Republican Party was a third party when it first arose. The Democrats emerged from the Democratic Republicans. There were Federalists, there were Whigs, there was the Populist Party. All of these things, all of these movements have existed in the past. It's unthinkable to believe that that won't change as well in the future. In fact, we're overdue for such a major change. I think that the Libertarian Party is not going to lose out steam. I think it's going to continue growing because I think it's likely that they'll finish well enough in these elections so that they become viewed as a viable party. I think the Green Party over time will continue to grow, probably hastened by certain European groups that will be more than happy to lend a hand. They'll look at the movement there, and it will become sort of a socialist light movement focused on environmentalism and certain other things. It'll be a fringe party for a long time, but it will gain steam, as opposed to the Democrats right now that are dying off as a party. at least unless they're willing to give up sort of the corporate centrism. The Republican Party is turning itself into a further right populist movement. That works. That works. It differentiates them. The neocons and the neoliberals are the same thing, so it helps them to differentiate their party's platform from the Democrats. The Democrats, meanwhile, are holding to that stagnant corporate centrist rhetoric, which means they're the monkey in the middle getting pressed from both sides by the Greens, who are more liberal, and elements within their own party, the progressives, which may at some point in the future split off and join sort of the further left, and the Republicans on the other side that have successfully reformed their party into a more paleocon populist party. And so the Democratic core, which is losing ground day by day, as it turns out that they're nothing more than a bunch of shills for corporations and banks, they're the ones that are going to get eaten up. If there's only room in U.S. politics for two parties, the Democrats will probably be the party that dies off. The Libertarians and the Greens will begin to rise to make up for lost ground. The Libertarians have their own separate movement that is simply growing in an organic fashion. The Green Party now represents a large core, several million people on the far, far left that are sort of like Jimmy Carter liberals or Bernie Sanders socialists or Elizabeth Warren progressives. They're going to continue drawing more people out of the party. When Wikileaks says that it's going to release more material, my hope is that the bulk of it does relate to the Democrats, because we do need to kill off one of the two main parties in this country in order to usher in a situation which both third-party groups, the Libertarians and Greens, can begin competing. That way, what you end up with is essentially a common-sense, centrist, libertarian, pragmatist core that is dedicated to stripping back some of the more abusive parts of government and maintaining a level of comfort, a level of the United States needs to use common sense, government does not need to involve itself in some of the peripheral issues it does. A pragmatic approach, which will inevitably, that will schism as well in the future. The more purist elements will be sort of ANCAPs or something like that. I don't think it would hurt the core of the movement if it ever gains dominance. The Republicans will be on one side representing populism, representing on economic issues, we need to scale back government intervention. On social issues, we're more or less represent the status quo for the most part. But we're not into globalism and neoconservatism. And then the left, on the other side, which also will oppose sort of globalism and neoconservatism, I hope, although it may re-embrace it in the name of environmentalism or some bullshit like that if it absorbs too many left Democrats. And they will represent, we need more welfare, we need, essentially bleeding heart liberals. It's important to remember that the nominee of the Democratic Party right now is not a liberal. Hillary Clinton's not a liberal. She's also not a socialist. She's not a progressive. She's a corporate, almost right-winger. She has a very large proportion of her views in common with like Mitt Romney or George Bush. Very little in common with Gary Johnson or Jill Stein or Donald Trump. She's not a populist. She doesn't care about American jobs. She wants to send more jobs overseas. So, as far as Trump goes, she's quite a distance on that sort of issue. With Gary Johnson, she does want gun control. She does want moral policing. She doesn't want to end the drug war, so she's certainly has nothing in common really with the libertarian movement. She's also not in favor of significantly increasing taxes or environmental regulations, and she's a globalist, so she doesn't have much in common with the Green movement. All things considered, the Democratic Party is now, in a moral sense, and in a sense of momentum, the weakest party in the United States, behind both the libertarian and green movements. The Democrats are now the weakest movement. They have the longest tradition dating back several centuries. They're older than the Republican Party. They're older than the Libertarian Party of the United States, although not the libertarian ideology. That was the ideology of George Washington. They're certainly far older than the Green movement. It's an old party, and old things tend to die in time. The Democratic movement, which represented the feel-good era of the late 80s through the mid, sort of the early Obama era, that neoliberal approach, and by neoliberal I mean somebody who wants to send jobs overseas so that investors in the United States can get wealthy, bilking people, and then re-importing goods. The party that wants to erode most parts of the Constitution. We're not just talking about guns. The Republicans shoot themselves in the foot pun intended, when they just fixate on guns. The Democratic Party also doesn't want you to have the right to privacy. They've made that abundantly clear with Obama and the NSA. They don't believe in free speech. They want to regulate the internet, for one major example. They certainly don't believe in the rights of states unless it suits them, unless the state is more progressive or tolerant than the federal government on something, then they fully support it. They don't appear to believe in the right to a speedy, fair public trial, since every time somebody they don't like has a criminal, you look at the George Zimmerman case, they want to indict them in the court of public opinion, especially if there's anything racial to do with it at all. And then they want to lean on the jury, they want to lean on the judge, they get outraged if the verdict goes against them. I mean, it's a shit show. You see plenty of dishonesty coming from the neocons within the Republican Party, and Trump, if he is elected, he's going to have a bigger job purging the neocons from his party in the midterms than he is beating down the Democrats that will certainly be against him. It'll be very difficult for him, at least for the first 2 years. He'll probably have to spend most of his personal fortune, if he really wants to kick enough of the neocons out, get them primaried against opponents, upstarts from other movements, the libertarian-leaning wing of the Republican Party, the Tea Party, perhaps more of the moral conservatives, and the paleocons certainly, like Ron Paul individuals, somebody like that. He's going to need to displace as many of the John McCain's, Mitt Romney's, Jeb Bush's, and John Kasich's and Ted Cruz's in the party as he can. He's going to have to displace dozens of people within the House and Senate to have any chance at all of unifying his party and forcing the populist message to go beyond just a one-term disaster show. The Democrats, meanwhile, have an even tougher road. They have to get Democrats to believe that somebody who is implicated in a massive email scandal involving her own server, that's been now implicated in a de facto sense with the DNC, in rigging the Democratic primaries, and who wasn't perceived of as trustworthy even before that happened, who lied to the whole nation and told us that a terrorist attack was spawned by a shitty YouTube video that was probably made by the CIA in the first place. She has to convince people, and the Democratic Party have to convince people, that that's a trustworthy individual, and that all of the people falling behind her don't fall into two categories. People who are corporate neolibs like she is, who don't deserve re-election at all, and people who are progressive or socialist but have fallen in line for pragmatic reasons. I don't think that the Democratic Party is going to pull it off very easily. It's an uphill battle for them. In my own opinion, the Democratic Party will be the one that dies off, not the Republican Party. The Republican Party has successfully already transformed itself. I think that Trump's path may be easier additionally, because if people within the Republican Party see that Trump's populist message is popular, does work on an economic level, and hasn't caused Armageddon, they will be more receptive to that message. It'll be half-assed at first. It'll take a lot of convincing either way. But if that happens within the first year or two, if he does well enough so that he has the bully pulpit, the people actually appreciate what he's doing, if that happens, he may not have to purge Congress in order to get his way. As far as Supreme Court appointees, I have a feeling that he would appoint moderates. I think that as far as Scalia's seat, he'll appoint someone who's far right, who's like Scalia. Once that gets done, though, once his own party is seen he's capable of putting a conservative on the Supreme Court, and he hasn't gone after guns like the Democrats screamed about, oh, he's a secret Democrat, and Ted Cruz screamed about he was a secret liberal on board with Hillary or something. If that happens and they quiet down, he will quietly slip more moderate individuals onto the court, maybe even individuals that lean more towards a libertarian stance, honestly, because he's a paleocon. He's best identified as a populist paleoconservative at this point. His economic message is a throwback to sort of the 40s or 50s conservative movement, which isn't bad, by the way. His foreign policy essentially boils down to, we're tired of sending jobs overseas, people will pay if they want to be protected by us, and then it'll all be hunky-dory. Also, it's funny to see Hillary and the Democratic Party rant about fear-mongering. Fear-mongering Trump, fear-mongering Pence, fear-mongering this person and that person, fear-mongering Gary Johnson to an extent. It's very funny that they use that, and then in the next breath, they will talk about how Trump will start World War III and is a Russian agent or something like that. Oh, well, NATO will collapse and Russia will run roughshod over the world. That's the fear-mongering that I see. And when people wake up and realize that at the first debate, I predict, it'll be all over for the Clinton camp, let's face it. No, I'm not going to change my prediction at all. I've had probably a dozen people tell me that I'm wrong in the last week or so, predicting that Trump would win. They say, no, Hillary will rig it. No, Trump has a demographic disadvantage. No, Trump doesn't have the votes. No, Trump is being outraised. Being outraised and having a demographic problem never hurt him in the primaries. It never hurts anybody during a paradigm shift. It certainly doesn't matter. Hillary could raise $1 billion, spend it all on ads, and her numbers would probably go down because people right now simply are not receptive. The independents that determine every fucking election are no longer responding to TV ads. They're no longer responding to rallies. They don't care. I myself included. If I see a Hillary ad on TV, does it make me... do I even pay attention to it? Of course not. If I've watched TV at all to see the ad in the first place, it just makes me chuckle. It's retarded. Trump isn't running these ads for the most part. He's just tweeting. That's his advantage. It costs him nothing. While he gobbles up more of the media cycle, gets more coverage than any ad he could ever buy, and it doesn't piss people off as much. It's more interactive. It's also more funny. We get a sense that Trump has some level of a sense of humor. Yes, maybe a little bit of a warped sense of humor at times. Oh, calling Elizabeth Warren Pocahontas, or saying Bernie wants to go home and lie down and go to bed. Okay, but it's still more interactive and entertaining. You can respond to those tweets. Can you do that to a TV ad? No. Hillary's wasted $100 million already putting those ads on TV during the primaries and now into the general. Then she runs this retarded ad at the DNC itself that people immediately likened to 1984. I pointed out on one article about this on Facebook. I said, yeah, well, this is a little bit like 1984, but Hillary Clinton's really more from a horror novel or something than that. I mean, one look at the proposals that she's made. Oh, we will have TPP. I'm sure that'll be so great for American jobs. She claims she's now ambivalent and will take another look and wants to reform it. No, she doesn't. She'd pass it first day if she had the opportunity and thought she wouldn't get impeached for fucking the job market even further. Of course she would. She gets all sorts of money from the same people that benefit from these deals. It makes it easier for an American corporation to sue foreign states, even if they've done something obviously illegal in those foreign states. It makes it easier for some investor, some banker, some corporatist or hedge fund manager, the kind of people donating to Hillary in the first place. Makes it easier for them to build a factory overseas and get rid of their jobs over here in the United States. All they're doing is they're sitting here collecting money from overseas, and then they re-import goods and sell them to people cheaper. The problem is cheaper goods comes at the expense of having good-paying jobs. That's always been the problem of outsourcing. It's not that it's a bad thing that the goods are foreign and they're cheaper by default because people are paid less. Okay, that's great. It also contributes to development in the third world. That's just great in a humanitarian sense. But people here are going to vote with their wallets first and foremost. Charity starts at home, as they say. What ends up happening is you've just hemorrhaged 1 million middle-class jobs. Now people are taking welfare, or they're working a 9-to-5 shift at Wendy's, and they can't even afford the cheaper products. So what's the point of bringing them in the first place? People are less well off. It would be better to give them middle-class jobs and have the goods cost a little bit more. The Democrats, the globalists in general, the neocons do it too. They like to rant about, oh, if we were making our own goods, they'd cost so much more. Yeah, but people would be making so much more. And we'd be exporting. We'd be a net exporter finally again. We wouldn't have to import cheap shit from China. We wouldn't be propping up Saudi Arabia. We wouldn't be propping up these tin horn regimes. Half of them would collapse. I think that looks like a much better world. It looks like a much better world to me. People can live a dignified lifestyle. And keep in mind, the idea of bringing back the American middle class and having domestic goods that cost a little more, in a way it would actually screw me. Because I'm self-employed. I'm not necessarily going to get that $50K a year factory salary or something like that. I'm making less and I'm self-employed. because I choose to, because it's more fun, honestly, to live this way and I'm not abusing my body. But it would be a small price to pay. The community would be more vibrant. We'd probably get a couple factories here in Rutland. Things would look better. Things would be cleaner. The roads would be taken care of. People wouldn't have to pay nearly as much in taxes because there'd be so much more productivity to actually tax. You could spread it out much more thinly across all of the different echelons of the economy, and it wouldn't be a problem. It wouldn't be a problem at all. You'd put 10 million more people back to work. People would be begging for those jobs. It's a great idea. Populism in that economic sense can work. Now, if Trump goes whole hog and starts pissing on some foreign state, you might see some problems. But there's no reason to believe he's actually going to do that. Who gives a fuck if he wants to build a wall on the border? If you think it won't work, you think it won't work. Okay. The government wastes plenty of money on things that are not even a good idea to begin with. At least the concept of a wall has been tried and actually worked halfway decent before in human history. So no, I don't see a problem with that either. Let people paint murals on either side or something like that. Turn it into an art center. People can just paint on the wall. While little satchels of marijuana are flying over the border. People with catapults are hurling the cocaine over or whatever. That's another thing. And the drug war in this country's problems are basically over. Lock, stock, and barrel. That's about all. Peace out.